Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Farther Afield by Miss Reed. We had our last lunch at a favorite restaurant nearby. Here the shrimps seemed to be larger than ever, and the salads more delicious. Two cats attended us and obligingly cleared up the shrimps' heads and tails. Would Tibby have been so helpful? Perhaps after his Spartan fare at the kennels. We sauntered back replete to the welcome shade of our little house and lay on our beds to rest. Outside, the light and heat beat from the white walls. All was quiet, wrapped in the hush of siesta time. Only the sea moved, splashing its minute waves on the beach below us. "Must remember to put out my airsick pills," yawned Amy. "That's the thing to take shares in, you know. Wholesale chemists. When you think of the handfuls of pills the GPs hand out these days, you can't go wrong." "I'll remember," I said, "when I don't know what to do with my spare cash." "My Aunt Minnie," went on Amy languidly, "left me some hundreds of shares in something called Nicaraguan Railways or Peruvian Copper. I can't quite recall the name, but something far-flung in the general direction of South America. They bring in a dividend of about 35 pence every half year. James says for pity's sake sell 'em, but I don't like to. She was a dear old thing, though addicted to musical evenings, and she left me a beautiful ring." "The one you're wearing?" "Amy has a square-cut emerald, which is my idea of a perfect ring." "No, this is part of the product of 5 hideous rings my dear mother left me. She left 4 of them by her older sisters. No, this is part of the product of 5 hideous rings my dear mother left me. She was left 4 of them by her older sisters, and every one was the same setting, a row of 5 diamonds like little tiny sparkling teeth. I sold them when she died and bought this instead, and put the rest in the Caxley Building Society. Very useful that money has been, too, for this and that." Silence fell. It was very hot, even in our stone-built house, but I gloried in it. How long before I saw sunshine like this again, I wondered. Amy's eyes were closed, and I was beginning to plan my packing when she spoke again. "Did you have musical evenings when you were young?" Aunt Minnie's were real shockers, especially as she made me accompany the singers, who were no keener on my assistance than I was on their efforts. She had a baby grand, covered with a horrible Eastern scarf thing, ornamented with bits of looking-glass, and nothing would persuade her to open the lid. Mind you, it would have been a day's work to clear off all the silver-framed photographs, not to mention the arrangement of dried grasses. We all just soldiered on, while Aunt Minnie nodded her head and tapped her foot in approximate time to the music. We got stuck with oratorios mainly, I remembered. Penitence, Pardon, and Peace, Olivet to Calvary, the Crucifixion. My father could sing very well. Unfortunately, I couldn't play very well. Tempers used to get rather frayed until we fell back on something simpler, like The Lost Chord or Merry Goes the Time When the Heart is Young. "I sometimes think," said Amy, "that people of our generation who are constantly mourning the good old days must have forgotten such things as musical evenings and starched knickers and wash days tacked with yellow soap and washboard and button-hooks that pinch your flesh and elastic driving you mad under your chin," I added. "Children have such lovely clothes these days. No wonder they learn to dress themselves so much earlier than we did. A case of have to, I expect, with all the mums having to rush off to work." Amy grunted contentedly and turned her face into the pillow. Peace descended again, and I lay listening to the gentle splashing of the waves and the chirruping of a nearby cricket until I, too, drifted into sleep. We slept for over an hour and woke much refreshed. "Let's ring for tea here," suggested Amy, "and remind them about early breakfast. What hopes of bread rolls, I wonder?" It had been a standing joke. Each morning our tray had arrived with 1 bread roll each, a sweetish confection rather like a Bath bun without the sugar, and a slice of sultana cake. Accompanying these things was a small dish of unidentifiable jam. The bread rolls were excellent. The other things too cloying for our taste first thing in the morning. Marmalade we had on one unforgettable occasion. Our telephone conversation with the kitchen staff ran on the same lines each morning. "Hello, this is room 28. "Hello, good morning. Breakfast?" "Please, for two. Coffee for two." "Coffee for two." "Bread rolls for two. No buns or cake, please." "Bread rolls. No other things?" "No, thanks. Just bread rolls." "Just bread rolls." "And marmalade, please, not jam." "Just marmalade. No nice jam?" "No, thanks." "Breakfast coming." "Thank you." "Okay, you're welcome." And within a few minutes the waiter would arrive with a beaming smile and a few words of English and a laden tray with exactly the same food as before. "We might just as well save our breath," Amy had said, but I disagreed. It was part of the fun to keep trying, and as I pointed out, we had been given marmalade once. I must say it seemed odd that with oranges and lemons bowing the trees to the ground with the weight of their fruit, marmalade seemed to be looked upon as a luxury. As it was, we had been obliged to buy a jar in the town, and very poor stuff it was, reminding me of the jam manufacturer who made a fortune with his product Spinnert, the main ingredient of which can readily be recognized by those who can read backwards. Turnips. Our tea arrived, and we were told that as we had to make such an early start, breakfast would be delivered in the evening with the coffee in a flask. We received the news stoically, as befitted Britishers. "At least it will wash down the quells," Amy pointed out. "Let's go out and get some air." It was still too hot for much exertion, but we strolled in the shade of the trees and watched the more energetic holiday-makers swimming in the pool. A gardener was pushing a hand mower very carefully and slowly over the two tiny lawns. The hose and sprinkler lay nearby. I wished my lawn at Fairacre received such love. It would be the showpiece of the village. It was sad to think that this time tomorrow I should not be here to see the sprinkler at work on those two tiny thirsty patches. Later, after dinner, we took a last walk through the streets of Agios Nikolaos and stopped for coffee at our favorite cafe. The night was velvety dark, and we sat at a table near the water's edge. The sea slapped the bottoms of the moored boats as they swayed at anchor. Out to sea, a lighted ferryboat chugged across to Piraeus, and I wished that one day I might visit Greece itself. As though reading my thoughts, Amy said, "We haven't seen nearly enough, of course. Next time we must stop at Athens and then come on to Crete and see the western end. The thing to do would be to spend 6 months or a year in these parts." "I can't see our education committee giving me leave of absence for that time," I observed. "If things don't turn out well at home," said Amy slowly, "it's a comfort to think there's so much to do here. I shall hang on to the idea. It would be a lifeline to sanity, wouldn't it? I mean, in the presence of civilizations as old as these, one's own troubles seem pretty insignificant. Or so I've found, anyway," she added, "during the last fortnight." "I'm more glad than I can say to hear you say that," I told her soberly. "I can't thank you enough for coming with me. You've been the perfect companion for an old misery like me." "Thank me!" I cried. "Why, it's entirely—" But Amy cut me short. "One word of thanks from you, my dear, and I shall throw those sandals you've just kicked off into the sea, and you'll have to walk back to the hotel barefoot." The threat sufficed. Amy had won, as usual. We took our time over the coffee and lingered to look at the sea on our way home. Sure enough, on the low table in our room the breakfast tray awaited us. It was covered with a snowy cloth. When we came to investigate, we found 1 bread roll, 1 bun, 1 slice of cake, and a dish of dark brown fig jam apiece. 2 stout flasks flanked our empty cups. Well, there we are, said Amy, replacing the cloth. How about that at 5 in the morning? I don't think I'll be able to face a thing. I shall, I said robustly. Just think how far it is to England. We may not be able to eat on the plane. I shan't want to, replied Amy, putting her quells on the tray with a sigh. We undressed and climbed into our beds for the last time. I meant to lie awake for a little, savoring all the pleasures of scent and sound that came drifting from the garden at night. But I scarcely had time to arrange my pillow before sleep overcame me, and a few minutes after that, it seemed, the telephone was trilling, telling us to get up in readiness for our departure. Chapter 13. Going Home. It was still dark when we set off along the bumpy road to Heraklion, but by the time we were in the airplane, the sky was filled with rows of little pink clouds made glorious by the sunrise. We circled the island, and I wondered with a pang if I should ever set foot there again. My experience had opened my eyes to a larger, more beautiful world, to an ancient culture happier than our own, and had given me a glimpse of the glory that was Greece. I felt wonderfully refreshed, and my arm and ankle were so much better that I discarded my sling whenever possible. Prudence, however, made me wear it on the flight. One gets jostled quite badly enough during travel when hale and hearty. With a slowly knitting bone, I intended to take all precautions. We made an unscheduled stop at Athens. The workmen were still pushing screaming machines over the marble floor, and the dust was as thick as ever. However, we found a cup of good coffee and a very nasty chocolate biscuit apiece while we waited, and then we were herded aboard the new airplane. Amy had taken her quells with a swig of flask coffee and much shuddering, and dozed for most of the journey. I had insisted that she sat by the windows this time, so that I was in the middle seat of the three. There were a good many empty seats, so that I was somewhat surprised when a lone female came to sit by me. "Haven't I seen you in Agios Nikolaos?" she began. I said indeed she might have done. "I saw your friend had dropped off and thought you might be glad of some company," she said. "How kind of you." "Well, I'm a school teacher, and I should think you are too, so I thought we might have something in common." Now, I am not ashamed of being a school teacher, rather the reverse. When I consider that I am still strong and healthy after so many years of classroom battling, but there is something depressing in being told that one wears one's profession like a brand upon one's forehead, the mark of the beast, in fact. I said civilly that yes, I was a school teacher. "There's a look, isn't there?" she prattled. "Downtrodden, hungry, mad?" "Not quite that. Shabby, perhaps, and not much given to dressing up and making up properly." This was really rather hard. I had visited the hairdresser at the hotel the night before, and she had given her all. Never had I looked so bouffant, so glossy, so truly feminine. The sunshine had produced highlights which I had never before seen in my normal mouse, and I was looking forward to dazzling Fairacre with my new glamour and my suntan. I was also wearing an expensive, for me, pale pink linen dress and jacket, and Aunt Clara's seed pearls, not to mention new white sandals. And here was this stranger bursting in upon my previous solitude and generally undermining my self-confidence. I was catty enough to notice her own crumpled floral print frock and dirty white cardigan, and also her undistinguished coiffure, but was humane enough to forbear to comment. Really, civility puts almost too great a strain on mankind at times. Primitive women, I reflected, under such provocation, would have torn the greasy hair from this person's head in handfuls, and felt very much better for the exercise. Instead, I asked her where she had stayed in Agios Nikolaos, and mentioned a hotel near our own, which we had visited for lunch once. "If I'd had the money," she said, "I should have stayed where you were, but you can't do that on a teacher's salary." She sounded suspicious, and I wondered if she thought I had some secret source of income, heroin, perhaps, smuggled in the heels of my new shoes. Obviously, in her eyes, my age and dowdy appearance would exonerate me from any other immoral activity. I did not rise to the bait, but asked her if she had far to go when we reached Heathrow, and she told me that she lived at Chatham near the docks, and would be met by her fiancé and his twin brother. They were exactly alike and went everywhere together. I asked when she hoped to get married, and wondered, but did not ask, if both twins would be together on the honeymoon. Next Easter, she said, and went on to ask where I lived. I told her. It's so pretty round there, she said enthusiastically. I agreed. You wouldn't like to change houses, I suppose? It sounds a lovely place for a honeymoon, and Chatham would make a nice change for you. Frankly, no, I seldom leave home, I said shortly. I put one of my magazines firmly upon her knee and opened my own. She looked aggrieved, but opened it obediently, and silence fell. I glanced at the comatose Amy. One eye opened and shut again in a conspiratorial wink. Amy doesn't miss much. A few minutes later, she roused herself and sat up with a yawn. What a lovely nap. What's the time? The stranger told her, returned my magazine, and stood up. I'll go back to my seat now, she said, showing more tact than I imagined she had. On the other hand, it was said so primly that maybe she had taken offense at my disobliging refusal to exchange houses. Whatever the reason, it was a great relief to see her depart after such an unnerving encounter in mid-air. We were late arriving at Heathrow, and we seemed to wait for hours around the revolving contraption that disgorges one's luggage. Why is it, I wondered, that other people's luggage always seems superior in size, quality, and polish to my own? I was somewhat cheered by watching a red-faced man, very much like our local farmer, Mr. Roberts, collecting his pieces of battered luggage, each securely lashed with orange binder twine. I've lost 2 good leather straps up here in my time, he said, catching my eye. They won't bother with binder twine, and if they do, there's plenty more where that came from. Amy rang the garage whilst I collected our bags, and hours later, it seemed, we settled ourselves into her car. The air was chilly, the clouds like gray tent low over us, rain lashed the tarmac, umbrellas glistened all around, and goose pimples stood on our arms. One could almost feel the tan fading. We were in England again. What an extraordinary woman that was, commented Amy as we drove from the airport. I noticed her once or twice when we were walking about the town. She seemed to be holidaying alone. I'm not surprised. A typical case of someone who lives alone, continued Amy, hooting at the motorist in front of us, who had signaled that he was going left for the last half-mile, then right, and eventually went straight on. How do you mean? Well, there's a tendency for solitary people, some of them, I should say, to tag on to complete strangers and engage them in conversation. Lonely, of course, that's all, but a trifle disconcerting for the buttonhole. And then these loners never stop talking. Most exhausting. I must say you choked off that poor dear in a brutally efficient way. I began to feel qualms on 2 counts. I hope I wasn't brutal, I said. Let's say decisive, said Amy, and I really don't blame you after such cheek on her part. And I hope I don't waylay people and talk too much, I added, expressing my second fear. Amy laughed indulgently. You silly old dear, you've always talked too much. I digested this unpalatable truth as we drove toward Pent. We had arranged to go straight to Amy's house from Heathrow when we planned the holiday. It was much nearer than Fairacre, and we both felt that a good night's sleep after our flight would enable us to face the home shores before us. As always, Amy's house presented a calm and beautiful aspect. There were flowers in every room, no sign of dust, everything immaculate and welcoming. There was even a tray laid ready for 2, complete with biscuit tin, and Amy lost no time in putting on the kettle. A pile of letters stood on the hall table, and Amy looked at it anxiously as we brought in her luggage from the car. "I'll tackle that later," she said. I was in my old bedroom overlooking the cornfields. In the driving rain, nothing was moving. No doubt the farmers were cursing all round, I thought, for some of the fields I could see were only half cut. Despite the rain, my spirits were high. We were home again, back among the wet fields, the dripping trees, the little runnels of brown rainwater chattering along the roadside. I thought of those 2 parched lawns at the hotel as I gazed at Amy's lush slopes before me. A thrush, head cocked on one side, was listening for a worm, and 3 sparrows searched among the plants in the border with raindrops splashing on their little tabby backs. Somewhere far away a sheep bleated and another answered. The fragrance of wet cloth and leaves was everywhere, and I thanked heaven for the sights and scents of home. Later that evening, Amy read her correspondence, sorting it into piles very tidily, while I read a gardening magazine and learnt all about the things I should have done last spring in order to have a flourishing flower border next season. "Too late," I said out loud. "What is?" "Taking pipings and cuttings and sowing seeds ready for planting out this autumn, and 100 other things. It's an extraordinary thing, but whenever I rush to the nurseryman in autumn, fired to have some particular plant, then the right time to put it in was last spring. And of course when I rush there in the spring, the particular plants I'm mad for should have gone in last autumn." "I must remember to give you a basic gardening book for Christmas," said Amy severely. "You sound the most haphazard gardener. It's a wonder yours looks as well as it does. Mr. Willet's, I suppose?" She patted her piles of correspondence into neat stacks. "Friends who won't mind waiting, friends who will mind waiting, businesses and bills," she said, surveying them. "Well, bills could go on the won't mind waiting stack, I should think." Amy shook her head. "I was brought up as you were, my dear, to pay as I went along. I've a perfect horror of owing money, born of a frugal upbringing. As for hire purchase, my blood runs cold at the thought. Suppose suddenly I had no money." She stopped and looked out at the gray evening. When she spoke again, her voice had altered. "A letter from James among this lot." It was in the friends who will mind waiting pile. "He's still pressing for a divorce. What a hopeless situation this is. I wonder what the outcome will be. I felt so strong and sensible while we were away, but now I'm back I feel as wobbly as a jellyfish." "Put it out of your mind," I advised. "You've had a long day traveling. Things will seem saner after a night's sleep. And if I were you," I added, "I should transfer his letter to the friends who won't mind waiting pile." Amy laughed and did so, and it seemed to give her some comfort. And we'll continue the journey back home next time.